All right. Good day and aloha, world history students. Good day and aloha, juniors. How are we doing today? We're going to proceed. We're going to go. We're going to make it happen. World history class will go on. All right, so here we go. Here is sort of my getting going with the course of, really world history is a course of human history, isn't it? Okay, so we have to go all the way back to the beginning. If we're going to be serious about human history, we need to go all the way back to the beginning. So what we're going to discuss today in the next couple of days is what I call pre-written, not just I, lots of people call it pre-written history. The key word here being pre-written. Okay, I guess you could say that's two words, but pre, of course, means before, written, therefore before written history. So we're talking about way back. We're talking about a long time ago. Okay, so that's our topic for the next couple of days, pre-written history. All right, so what I would recommend, what we call this in world history class, ladies and gentlemen, we call this the pre-written history widp. Now, what the heck is a widp, Mr. O'Brien? Well, widp stands for write it down, period. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to get a blank piece of paper, some way, some shape, somehow, some form, and you're going to write it down. So we call these widps. When I do this, you're going to write down what I have happening. You probably should have gotten some papers on your drive-through. What I would recommend is you sort of start building a three-ring notebook. That's the best way to do this, and then when we all come back together in school, whether it's 5 days a week or 1 day a week or whatever, then we build your three-ring notebook, your three-ring binder. How's that sound? We don't take notes in this class. We do widps. All right? All right, here we go. Write it down. So here's what you're going to do. Take a moment, and what we're going to do today is 2 timelines. All right? And so I've already drawn out the first timeline. It's the easiest one. And if you take a look at this, this timeline is based on millions of years ago. Okay, so what we're going to call this timeline, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call this what scientists used to believe. All right, what scientists used to believe. All right, so what you can see here is my timeline. Here's today, here's where we are today. And then what I'm doing is going backwards millions of years ago. And what I'm basically saying to you is that on this bottom part of the timeline, this is where we see apes, gorillas, even monkeys we can put down here. All right, and then along this top line, this is humans. All right, now the implication, of course, of this timeline is that humans, there's several implications. One is that humans have been on Earth roughly 5-6 million years. That's how long humans have been on Earth. And let me just say that writing is a relatively new invention. Writing is probably 10,000 years old, maybe a little bit longer. So in the grand scheme of things, written history, if you think about just written history, it's barely a sliver on my Sharpie line right over here. Most of human history has been pre-written history. In other words, how about this? Caveman, ape man, all right? This is what we're talking about here. Now, this is called what scientists used to believe, and basically there was this, basically the timeline of the evolution of humans, all right? And one of the other things we could take away from this is that what is the implication here about humans and apes and humans and gorillas? Well, they're our distant cousin. And, you know, roughly 5-6 million years ago, there wasn't multiple, species. There was one. And sometimes you'll hear this, they call this sometimes the missing link. This is a term that is used for this particular species that existed back here. Something like this has never been discovered. There's never been remains discovered to explain this. This is theoretical back here. But pretty much most scientists still agree, even though this chart is what they used to believe, they pretty much still agree that there is some sort of common ancestor for humans and our fellow primates. That's one of the key words I would use here is primate. Okay, now, what kind of, we are what are known as
We are Homo sapiens, aren't we? Have you heard this term before? Homo sapien. All right, so let's zoom in here just a little bit. We're down here, we're closer to today. Obviously, Homo sapien is our species. And Homo sapien, of course, has been, been around for a little while. Not super long, you might be surprised to hear that, but Homo sapien has not necessarily been around that long. Now, maybe you've heard of some of the other discoveries, and I can tell you that most of these discoveries have been made in Africa. They're mostly in the Eastern Hemisphere, these pre-written history humans. Maybe you've heard of, well, let's put it that's roughly in here somewhere we had something known as Homo erectus. This is another species of human, all right? We had a species called, let's make sure I get this correct here. We had one called Homo, let me make another here, Homo habilis. And let me make sure I spell that correctly. Habilis. Habilis. Okay? You go back a little bit even further, you get to something called Australopithecus africanus. All right? A lot of times these species of pre-written history humans are named after one of the places that they're found. Okay? So the remains of Australopithecus africanus were obviously found in Africa. We can go back a little bit further. How about this? We'll go back to Australopithecus, and you can see my point here, I think. Australopithecus afarensis. All right, and these are scientific names. Now, what is being implied here? All right, what is the message that is being laid out here? Well, if you look at this timeline, what is basically being laid out is that we, Homo sapiens, are all direct ancestors of all these other species of humans. In other words, you could say that each species of humans evolved into the next species of humans, etc., down the line, until we have all of the modern sort of characteristics of Homo sapien. And so this was a nice, simple, easy line, just right along there. Very beautiful, made sense. Charles Darwin was right, etc., etc. All right, and everything was well and good. And then something very interesting happened. Probably, let's see, I think the discovery of a new species, this new species, was not that long ago, 1700s, early 1800s. Somebody found in a valley in Germany, somebody found some bones. And it was kind of interesting, these bones that they found, there was a lot of them. And so they called the local police in this area of Germany in the 1800s, I'm pretty sure. And the police came out and said, these are not, they thought it was a crime scene. And they determined that, no, this is something else. So the police called the local, the nearby university, and some university students came out and took a look at these bones, and they decided that these bones were human remains. But there was something very interesting about these human remains. They were old. And so they started dating these things, and they got into it, and they finally figured out that they're roughly right about here. They had come up with a new species of humans. And they called this species Homo, and I'm going to run out of room here, Neanderthalis. That's an ER behind there, sorry. Okay? Homo neanderthalis. Because it was found in the Neander Valley in Germany. And so what scientists did, well, they were very excited. It was very cool, super interesting, certainly. And so what they did is they said, okay, we're going to put Neanderthal right in the line here, okay, where it belongs, on the line. And everybody's like, okay, super, that's great, super fine. So what is the implication? They dated the Neanderthal remains. They were slightly older than Homo sapien remains, okay? Even though they were, some Homo sapien remains were the same age, they just said, okay, Neanderthal just goes right into the line of evolution. Then, of course, what happens as time goes along and the science gets better, doesn't it? Science always improves, doesn't it? And a lot of times when science improves, we discover that some of the great discoveries of history, scientific discoveries of history, were wrong. Well, what they start to decide is they start to look for, if Neanderthal is so close to Homo sapien, shouldn't there be a lot of Neanderthal remains in Homo sapiens? Shouldn't we be able to find remnants of Neanderthal in us? And I can tell you that at first, the science wasn't good enough to find it. And everybody was like, there's nothing that we can find in Homo sapien that indicates we're a direct link to Neanderthal. So now the question becomes is, what does this mean? As time has gone along, there is Neanderthal remains in Homo sapiens, especially European Homo sapiens Homo sapiens of European descent, some of Asian descent. But if you're a person, a modern Homo sapien of African descent, guess what? There's no Neanderthal within you. So now what does that sort of tell us? That tells us that, Neanderthal is not on the line. In fact, Neanderthal was its own line, just like that. Now, guess what this means? This means that if we are going to take Neanderthal and put him on his own line, what do we have to do with all of these other human species? Well, you figured it out, okay? We have to take these other human species and we have to re-examine what they were. And this is what the decision was. And so what I'm going to do is, and what you should do is, you should make we're going to make a new timeline. We're going to make it roughly the same size. It should be the same size because it's the same amount of time. Okay, but obviously this sucker is going to look a little bit different. Okay, so we're not going to put in the top line yet. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Today. Millions of years ago. Okay? All right, now here's what, and by the way, you can see what I've just done. I've just sort of assisted myself by copying over the top. Okay? So what we're going to call this one is, we're going to call this what scientists now believe. Okay? And you should try to copy this down as close as you can here. And this is basically what it's going to look like. Okay? Okay, so there you go. You can see that I've differentiated every single species of pre-written history humans that have ever been found have now been given their own line. For example, this one right here is Australopithecus africanus. Okay, so that's one of the ones that from my previous list, right? Here's something. This is the indicator of the species of humans that lasted the longest on Earth. This one was Homo erectus. And again, these are scientific terms. So these are sort of like, if you will, this is the Homo group. This is what we call them, Australopithecines line. All right, and each one of these has its own set. Okay, so now here's what we sort of see right over here as we get to the very end, and this is sort of my whole point, is that this one right here is Homo Neanderthal. Okay, and then this one right here is Homo sapien. All right, now this map brings up, this timeline, I think, brings up some very interesting questions. And hopefully you can see some of these questions, and I think these are legitimate questions to ask. Number one, what do you notice? Okay, what do you notice? Like, this is a perfect example. What do you notice here in this little area that I've crudely drawn? You notice that Neanderthal and Homo sapien, their lives overlap. I mean, Homo sapien has probably been around maybe 250,000 years. All right. Homo Neanderthal was around from about 400,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago. So you can see there was an overlap. So now what does this mean? This could mean several things. Well, number one of the main things I think it means is they competed. There was a competition for food right here, wasn't there? Okay? There was a time period in which these two competed. All right? One of the other things I would say is that some people would say, well, maybe they interbred. All right? Maybe they crossbreeded. And there certainly is, as science, as I mentioned, has gotten better, there is evidence that that is probably true to a small degree. All right? They went to war with each other. There's not really evidence of that. Certainly they competed, but does that mean that there were out-and-out wars of organized attempts to wipe out the other one? There's no evidence of those types of things. But certainly we see in the timeline, there's many instances back through pre-written history in which multiple groups of pre-written history, human species existed and were probably very competitive. All right? Now, again, we're talking about the Eastern Hemisphere. We're talking about Africa is probably the main place. But one of the things you should know about Neanderthal is Neanderthal remains are really only found in Europe. There's really been hardly any Neanderthal remains found in Africa at all, whereas all of these species were discovered originally, including Homo sapien, in Africa. So now what happened when Homo sapien moved? Well, here's one of the big differences. Look, Neanderthal has always had this reputation as sort of a big, strong, brutish beast. Okay, certainly Neanderthal had a big brain. Neanderthal their brain was smart enough to think about group hunting techniques, clothing. They probably had a language, spoken language, not a written language. They had a spoken language. They were probably their bones were super thick. Their hips were such that they probably couldn't run. They didn't have any throwing weapons. Their brains couldn't conceptualize of throwing weapons. They only had thrusting weapons. And one of the things that's very important here is, what does Homo sapien eventually do? Homo sapien moves and goes worldwide. Like I said, Neanderthal was only in Europe and Asia. So now what does that tell us about Neanderthal? Well, that tells us that Neanderthal at the end was Neanderthal probably couldn't conceptualize the idea of movement, of long distance travel, of long distance movement. And so when Neanderthal's food supply officially ran out, what did they do? Did they go seek out new food supplies in a different place? No, they stayed put. Now this tells us that their brain were not quite as advanced as Homo sapien, even though I would argue that Neanderthals do have a bad reputation. They were extremely intelligent. Okay? All right, now, what's the other question we have to ask here? Well, I think it's obvious, and it's about Homo sapien. What must we ask about Homo sapien? What must we ask about all of us? Well, according to this, it was pretty simple. You could say, where did we come from? Well, we came from a long line of human species that we all evolved from, and we go all the way back to some sort of creature that is a species that connects us to apes and gorillas, our very close primate cousins. And we modern humans, we modern Homo sapiens came from a long line. But my point is, look what has been discussed and discovered. That's not necessarily the case. So you have to say, it's a fair question to ask, isn't it? Where did we come from? And this is a very simple thing. I mean, it's very easy to ask. Well, where did humans come from? Well, we came from other species of humans. Okay, great. Where'd they come from? Oh, they came from a primate species that existed that was just like that was apes and gorillas are cousins of the primates. There's a link to them. Okay, great. Where did they come from? Oh, well, those evolved from other mammals on Earth. Okay, great. Where did they come from? Oh, those evolved from the first life forms that crawled out of the ocean on Earth and breathed air. Okay, very cool. Where did they come from? Oh, well, they came from the very first species of life that lived in the ocean. Oh, okay, that's really cool. Where'd they come from? Oh, well, they came from the very first life when the earth formed and cells were whacking into each other and life was created, etc. Oh, wow, okay, very cool. Where'd that come from? And then here we're going back so far that these questions are still these questions are very difficult to answer, but I think they're legitimate to ask. Now, I'm not trying to make a big statement here about what's true and what's not true because I don't really know. I think it's interesting to study the aspects of this stuff, and I think it's worthy of study. Okay? All right. So, what are some, let's just do this very quickly. Humans, so let's write this up here. Humans, and of course, apes and gorillas. Well, what are the major differences here? Well, one of the first things I would say is obviously brain size. All right? Especially as this went along, all the humans' brains, regardless of what you believe, whether it's this one or whether it's this one, brains got bigger. Okay, craniums got bigger. All right, what else? These humans walk upright. They are bipedal. They walk on 2 feet. Gorillas, apes, they are quads. They don't have to. They can walk on 2 feet, but generally they use all 4. How about body hair? Body hair is a perfect example. What has happened to body hair over the course of human history? We've lost it. Well, of course, obviously, apes and gorillas still have body hair. So these are some things, these are some super basic things that we can show that are difference between us. We'll come back to that at a different time. Let me just add one more thing here. Really what you're seeing right here is you could argue that this whole thing up here was a big, how about we'll just add this one last thing, elimination tournament. Okay, so why don't you add that, just that little comment right there, elimination tournament. You could argue that Homo sapien was the long-term winner of a grand human elimination tournament. Okay, now let's turn to one last thing here. You should have, when you picked up your paperwork from the school, you should have what I call a picture gallery. And what we're going to call this is skulls, and what we're going to do is we're going to basically document what these are. And my point here, you can see there's 5 of them altogether. Okay, so my point here is that if I had not said something about pre-written history of humans and I had just flashed this up on the screen, what might you have said? You might have said, oh, that's a gorilla, that's an ape. Maybe you would have said that's a chimpanzee. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, that that is a human right there. Now, what makes it human? Well, one of the things I can tell you that makes it human is that you can tell the differences how the spine goes into the back of the skull and how the spine goes into the pelvis bones. Apes and gorillas, that connection at those 2 points are different than a bipedal species like humans are. All right. Obviously, what's the first thing you notice? Small brain. You may notice the big jaw. Maybe you said huge eyes. Well, one of the reasons we see huge eyes is because the brain is so small. So here's what we do. We're going to, you can see I have a letter A down here, so I want you to make note of this. This was Australopithecus afarensis. This human species was 3.6 million years old. How did they figure that out, Mr. O'Brien? Well, that's called carbon dating. So we're all carbon-based. There's science that can tell how long carbon has been in decline in carbon-based humans' remains. How's that sound? That's not the best example, but that is what I would say. Here we go. This is one of the really famous ones of all time. This was one of the earliest discoveries of almost a complete pre-written history skull. We call this Australopithecus boci, and you can really see that this thing's brain was not very big. You can see that there's no forehead. How's that sound? There's no what we would call the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe, of course, that's the creative area of the brain. And so these are, for lack of a better way of putting it, not fully developed brains. Here's one. This is Australopithecus africanus, probably one of the most famous ones. Maybe you've heard of the old famous discovery of almost a full skeleton. It was called Lucy, and it was found in the 1970s roughly. Australopithecus africanus, you can see the brain is a little bit bigger here. Now when we go to the backside, these two are very interesting, and that's why I put them on the same page together. As you can imagine here, as you see, I would say a couple things. I think probably the bottom one you can tell is a Homo sapien. This looks very similar to a modern Homo sapien skull because it is a Homo sapien skull. But take a look at this one, you can see, and I bet you can guess who this is. You can see here that this person had a big brain, really big brain. But look at the slant, the slope of the frontal lobe. You know, modern Homo sapien, modern humans, our forehead is basically vertical. So now what do you notice here about this species forehead? There's still a slope here. So as I'm sure you can guess, this is Homo neanderthalis. So pretty darn smart, but maybe not smart enough. How's that sound? Didn't quite make it all the way to the finish line of modern times, did they? And it's down here at the bottom, obviously this is a modern skull. It's a skull of a, I wouldn't say modern, this is a pre-written history skull. We call this Cro-Magnon man. We call this he's one of the most famous Homo sapiens. And I would say, look, Homo sapiens probably 200, maybe 200,000 years to present. I have 100,000 down there. But again, you can see the crossover. You can see the crossover in these two, as you can see. All right, now when you eventually come back to the classroom, one of the things you'll see up here in the, one of the things you'll discover when we eventually come to class is that my classroom is a timeline of history. All right, and over there's even the modern world history side. Well, if you look over here in the very far corner up here, you will see all the way up there. Isn't that fun? Right there. There's a couple of skulls up there. That's an Australopithecine over on that side, and you can see modern. Really, that's pictured. That skull is a photograph of the skull that you just made note of. But sure enough, what are they doing up there? They're squaring off with each other, looking at each other, and isn't that super fun? Okay, everybody? All right, very good. Nicely done today. I hope you enjoyed the discussion of modern world history. It makes you think a little bit. What's going on? What the heck is really going on? So history is always bringing up interesting questions, isn't it? All right, everybody? Be on the lookout for our next discussion, our next topic, next time. Okay, folks? Aloha.